Jen came through the outer office doors with fire in her eyes. Where's my miserable fucking bastard? Elizaveta looked up at her and slowly shook her head. He's not here, Jen. He said he wasn't feeling well. I'll just bet he doesn't. Do you know what he did? I've worked here for 8 years, Jen. There isn't anything that happens here that I don't know about, or in this case, at least can make a damn good guess. If it's any consolation, I'm upset, too. Liz watched the woman breathing heavily. They both knew the expected fight had only been delayed. Having lost her purpose for being there, Jen looked around the refined office, suddenly aware that if Greg's partner, Ron, was in his office, he could probably hear her. Hell, most of the people outside of the exterior office doors had probably heard her, some on the street, too. She hoped not. Fortunately, Liz was the only person she could see at the moment. Shit, she thought. She really didn't want other people to know her business, their business especially since Greg and Ron managed their local branch of the successful financial advisory firm. She briefly flushed and decided to try and make a stealthy retreat, but not before genuinely saying, "He'd be lost without you, Liz. I think this whole office would be. He really does love you, Jen. He has a shitty way of showing it." Liz watched the angry woman as she prepared to push open the door. Pausing for a sec, Jen turned to look at Liz, shook her head, and then she was gone. Liz picked up her phone and texted her manager, who also happened to be her very good friend. She just left. In her car, having calmed herself a little, she opened her phone to check Greg's location. Whereas he appeared to have been offline before she went storming to his office, he was online now, at home. As Jen drove towards their house, her emotions were roiling from one extreme to the other. They ranged from "how could he do this to me" to "I'm going to neuter the bastard." It had been about an hour earlier, after returning from her usual, as of the last few months, bi-weekly on Wednesdays, long lunch engagement, and was sitting in her office, that she had received a text from an unknown number. It said, "Your husband is cheating on you with my fiancé." She rolled her eyes upon receiving it and immediately swiped to dismiss it. Greg cheating on her? Please. He was as loyal as a yard dog. She figured it was spam or some other attempt at getting her to provide personal or banking information. A minute later she was irritated when she received another text from the same number, but a picture was included. When she tapped the notification to see it, she bolted upright in her chair. It was a picture of her husband being undressed by a scantily clad young blonde woman. That had her attention. "Suspicious," she replied, "this is a fake." The next text she received said, "I wish it were. This link has the video of their romp this morning." Jen texted, "Who are you? One posob, one pissed off son of a bitch." After making sure her virus protection was up to date, Jen felt like her world ended when she typed the link into her laptop. The video was only 5 minutes long, but it contained enough imagery to damage her. It showed her husband of 25 years entering a room with some young, big-titted bimbo wearing a barely there dress. Of course, Greg was wearing his red power tie and newly purchased double-breasted suit she had teased him about. While he looked nice, she had told him he looked like he was trying to go back in time 20 years. The bimbo was hurriedly trying to undress him, and Greg was mostly wearing a scowl. Over the next 5 minutes, she saw various scenes captured by, she guessed, a hidden camera near the head of the bed. The overall video quality wasn't the best, but it was clear enough to see what a cheating bastard he was. Arriving at her home, she could see Greg's Acura SUV in the garage, and she parked next to it in her Mercedes. The door from the garage opened near the kitchen, and as soon as she stepped inside, she could smell something baking, probably cornbread if her nose was guessing correctly. Having recovered her senses enough to calm herself back into her role of a refined tax attorney, her heels purposefully clicked on the tile floor toward the kitchen. Greg heard her approaching and turned to say, "Hey, honey. You're home early." "I am." It was a difficult day and thought it best to leave a little early. While she pulled her phone from her purse, he replied, "I know. I had a pretty shitty day too." She finally opened her messaging app and clicked on the link that had been provided. She thrust her phone towards Greg and said, "I'll bet it wasn't as shitty as mine." Greg looked at her phone for a sec and kind of shrugged his shoulders. "What's up?" The video wouldn't play. She got an invalid link error message. She muttered, "What? Was there something you wanted to show me?" Frustrated, she tapped on the picture that had been sent to her and said this. "See this?" He simply replied, "Oh. Yeah. I was going to tell you about that." Incredulous, she exclaimed, "I'll just bet you were." "You jerk. The link isn't working now, but there was a short video earlier of you and that woman's greatest hits. How could you do this to me?" "To us? I didn't have a choice." "You what?" "There is always a choice." The correct choice was to say, "No, I was being blackmailed." "Blackmail?" "Blackmail. I don't believe it. How was that woman blackmailing you? Do you remember when I went to that conference in Charlotte several months ago?" She just looked at him like, "Go on." I guess I had too much to drink because before I knew what was happening, Eva, the CEO's daughter, had me in a men's room stall giving me a blowjob. The next day, as the conference was breaking up, she pulled me aside and showed me a picture she had taken of us after we had finished. I don't even remember her taking the picture. She instructed me not to say a word to anyone. That wasn't hard because I hardly remembered any of it. Even if I believe that story, which sounds more made up than not. Aren't you forgetting one small detail? What? You forgot to tell your wife. While I'm not the type of attorney that could represent you, I work for a firm that has nearly 2 floors full of attorneys that could represent you. Right. That is the CEO's daughter. That would only end one of 2 ways: me walking out with a fat check or me being fired with nothing. That may be true, but how do you not even bring it up to me? We could at least have discussed it. Oh right. Like we spend so much time talking about things as is. That lit the fire back under Jen. Don't go there. This was important. We should have talked about this. And since we didn't, you allowed yourself to be led, willingly or not, into a hotel room this morning for what appeared to have been a rather intimate encounter. I didn't want to be there. I'm not sure why I can no longer see the video, but from what I saw, I can almost believe that. Still. You cheated on me. You cheated on your wife. Greg could easily see how angry she was. Good. Look. I'm sorry. Was all he could get out. Sorry. You bet your ass you're sorry. Sorry isn't going to cut it. Now he was getting his dander up. Fine. Yell at me. Scream at me. Tell me what a sorry piece of shit I am, and on and on. Then. Tell me where we go from here. I want to know what's going to prevent this from happening again. Well, obviously now that you know, she can't hold anything over us. Can she? She was flummoxed by that reply, off-axis, that they were even having this conversation. She seriously doubted that she was getting the truth, at least not the whole truth. She was so furious with him. She was having difficulty keeping her anger in check and popped off. What I meant was, is there anyone else that you're fucking that I should know about? Are you and Liz spending long lunches in your office with the door closed? Though given some of her young stud muffins you and she have told me about, I don't know why she would want you. Greg watched her eyes grow wide, realizing her mistake as soon as it left her mouth. She immediately began backpedaling. Wait. I take that back. I'm so sorry. That was out of line. You're absolutely right. How could someone in their mid-30s ever be interested in someone in their mid to late 40s? Not possible. Right? Hell, you're almost my age and you're not interested in me either. So upset with her previous line of interrogation, she completely missed the direct barb thrown at her, believing he was truly suggesting that nobody would want him, not that someone 10 years younger did want her. No. I didn't mean it. I'm just angry. Even if you were interested in her, I know Liz. I like Liz. She'd kick you, or any other married man, in the balls for hitting on her. I know her story. She isn't a cheater. Unfortunately, my husband is. She could tell this line of conversation was wearing on Greg. She asked, "What happened to my caring husband, who would do anything for me? When did I lose you?" "Probably when you started losing calendar dates that were important to us, like birthdays, anniversaries, and important work dinners with your husband. You kept saying you would make it up to me, but you never have. Never even tried. You didn't fucking care. Is that what this is about? I have to work on a few days that overlap events that can be made up, and now you get to cheat on me? Does me saying sorry now mean that you can just say oops? My bad, and this all goes away?" No. All I'm suggesting is that we were having big problems even before any cheating happened. And the cheating may be the end of our problems, the end of us. Greg didn't flinch at her saying that. He knew this could be the end, too, looked directly at her, and coo. LLY replied, "It may be." Now they were both fuming. The silence built for several seconds, and he said, "Look, nothing positive is going to happen here tonight, so I'm going to stay with my dad for a few days to let things cool down before we talk. With Mom gone, he'd probably appreciate the company." His mother had passed several years earlier. "Fine." As Greg began walking towards their bedroom, he called over his shoulder, "There's some fresh soup and cornbread on the stove, your favorite." She smirked, "If he thinks he can sway me with food, he better have another thing coming." 5 minutes later he was gone. Wordlessly. Both were still livid. Several hours later, hunger finally got the best of her, and she decided to try a little of what he had prepared. Unsurprisingly, it was delicious. She sighed. He really was getting to be quite good in the kitchen. She needed to find a way to get home sooner to enjoy it with him, assuming they could work their way through this catastrophe. She ate in silence except for the happy memories that still seemed to echo off the walls and throughout the house. Their eldest, Matthew, was just out of college and doing well. Their youngest, Zoe, was a junior in college and had moved out 3 years earlier. Now, without her husband there, that seemed like a decade ago. She needed to get a better handle on her hours. At that moment, it felt like the great big house in their prestigious neighborhood was about to swallow her whole. She could almost see herself shrinking, lost amongst the wonderful memories of their early years and nearly 2 decades of happy children growing up there. With the kids gone, she often felt like the only thing she had going for her was her work. They had both taken each other for granted. She wouldn't allow her timeline of memories to dwell on the last several years of neglect, nor particularly the last few months, which would have weighed prominently on her mind. She flicked on the TV to distract her from those haunting thoughts. Later that night at his father's place, Greg received a text from Liz, "Are you okay?" He replied, "As well as can be expected. I'm at my dad's place. Let me know if you need anything." "Will do. Thank you, Liz." During the next couple of days and on the weekend, Jen checked her phone from time to time to confirm that Greg was either at his father's house or very close. No real danger of the CEO's daughter, or whoever was that bimbo, meeting him there. She sighed again. She'd been doing that a lot since Wednesday. Cheating destroys the trust that is built up over years and decades. She wondered if she'd ever be able to trust him again. She was relieved not to be near a mirror when she had those thoughts, certain that her reflection would be giving her a scornful look, decrying hypocrite. On Monday she received flowers at her office from Greg. She wasn't moved. In the evening, as she left work at her normal time, late, she checked again, and Greg was at home. Upon entering the kitchen she could smell seafood and saffron. Jen let out the briefest of chuckles because this truly was her favorite seafood paella. She really was looking forward to sharing it with him. Those cooking classes that Greg took continued to pay off. He enjoyed cooking for something to focus on besides work and their problems. She enjoyed the results. Unfortunately, she had expected to join him for each of the 13 weekly evening classes. She only made it to 3. This time, upon seeing her husband, she hugged him. "Smells good, baby." "Thanks." Wine's breathing on the table. They had a good chat while eating, completely ignoring the 600-pound gorilla in the room. After they finished, Greg was washing dishes, and she asked, "Greg, how did we get here?" No term of endearment, just, Greg. He turned around and leaned against the counter. I don't know. I'd been wondering that myself for the last several months. My best guess is that at first, we were so focused on careers and then the kids, that we never really made time for us. Apart from birthdays and anniversaries, most of our discussions were about moving the household or the kids forward. I don't think we did a very good job of nurturing our own marriage. What do you think? I don't know. I know I love you. I do. And I know you love me. But like you, when I thought about it over the last few days, I'm stunned at how little we actually talk to each other anymore. Why did we allow ourselves to drift so far apart? I don't know. I want to blame your work, but honestly, I think that is more a symptom rather than the actual problem. She resisted the urge to go ballistic over his complaining about her work again. She did say, "You do realize that an associate partner is expected to put in and bill a lot of hours, even if we are also expected to help manage part of the firm, too." I know that. Look, I don't want to fight over your job, but the trial that consumed you for several months earlier this year really hurt us, and I'd argue that we were in trouble even before then. That trial had been particularly stressful, requiring her and another top attorney at her firm to work closely together for long periods of time. She would go back and undo some things regarding that relationship if she could. With more bite than she intended, she barked, "Trouble? Trouble? You were the one that started making important decisions without discussing them with me. I'm not even talking about you fucking that bimbo, either. Or the blowjob she gave you. I'm still not over that, nor may I ever get over that, but I view that as a symptom, too. Even before that, you redirected to Liz's son, Jonathan, the remaining $30,000 in change out of what was left in the kids' college fund. He bit back. Our kids' school was all paid up. We didn't need it, but Liz did because Jonathan, her only child, was just starting college. And if she could pay all 4 years up front, they were going to give her a $20,000 discount, plus now, she doesn't have to worry about the cost of tuition going up. Besides, combined, we make that in just under a month, so it isn't like we are going to miss it. No. We won't miss it, but what hurt me so much then, and what's bothering me now, is that you told me after the fact. If you had simply said that was what you wanted to do, I would have been fine with it. I've always liked Liz and Jonathan. But like you're messing around, I found out after the fact. Well, it was important, and given where our relationship was at the time, I didn't want to take the chance on you saying no because I was going to do it anyway. She exclaimed, "Jesus. We're so far apart right now, how are we ever going to get back together?" He asked, "Honestly, do you even want to?" She couldn't believe those words came out of his mouth. "Of course, I do." "Why would you even ask that?" "Because on the list of priorities in your life, I feel like I'm not even in the top 5. I know you like what you do, and you like the money and prestige even more, so I'm not expecting to be number 1 very often, but I'd at least like to feel like you wish I could be number 1 in your life from time to time." She rolled her eyes again, but he cut her off before she spoke. "No, really. If you really want a husband in your life, or hell, even just a friend or fuck buddy, you have to act like it, and I haven't seen that, nor much of you in a long time. Speaking of seeing you, when is the last time I saw you naked?" She let out a short huff. "We made love." He watched her trying to do the math. After she spent a few more seconds trying to remember, Greg did his best Ted Bridges from Caddyshack imitation. "Well, we're waiting." "Fuck you. So it's been a few weeks. I'm the one that received a video link of you screwing around on me." She still hadn't been able to access that video again. Greg said, "The answer to the question is that it was a little over 6 weeks ago, the night we actually used our reservation to eat at Il Cucina." He could see her simmering over the fact that he knew the exact date. Softening his tone, he asked, "Would you like to go to counseling and see if we can figure this out?" "I would. I love you, too, and we have a lot of years invested in each other. I'd hate to see us lose that if we can avoid it. I'm sure the kids would, too. I've been thinking about that, too. Do you want me to quit my job?" "What? No. You love your job. Why would I want that? The CEO's daughter? I'm sure we'll bump into each other from time to time." She let out a long sigh. God, I didn't even realize that she was out of college yet. Geez. She's probably the same age as Zoe or Matthew. He could see that lit the fire again. No. Don't quit because you aren't going to ever have another affair with her or anyone else. At least you better not. If you do, then we're history anyway. Greg didn't speak for a few seconds and was looking at her hard. She thought he looked like he was waiting for something. What? Not getting the response he was hoping for, he replied, if the counseling goes well maybe we could renew our vows. She smiled at that, and he continued, and get a postnup. That caused her to explode. A postnup? Why the hell would we get a postnup? Are you out of your goddamned mind? If you want to sign up for a postnup, go right ahead, but I'm not. If we get to that point, then we may as well call it quits. He was surprised that she still wasn't getting it, or refused to. She could see him visibly deflate after that. It was like the spark inside of him had been snuffed out. He was shaking his head. I was just trying to protect your partnership and our retirement accounts. I mean, otherwise, everything is 50-50 if we get that far. He turned to walk towards his home office. She didn't think she had verbally hit him that hard, but it was clear he was extremely dejected at the moment. Where are you going? To start looking for counselors. In a much more reserved tone, she responded, oh. Okay. She didn't think they were finished with their conversation, but she could tell that he was. Later that evening, as she was preparing for bed, the French double doors to the home office were open. She saw him working on his laptop, and she knocked on the doorframe. Hey. How's it going? It's going. I'll narrow the counselor list down to a short list of 3, and then you can review and select the one you want. Or you can bring your own list. She didn't think he sounded very enthused about the counseling. Honestly, she wasn't enthused about going through it, but she was hopeful that they could find something to which they could both hang on and then reconnect as a couple. No. I have faith that you'll find a good one. Just let me know if you need anything. Okay. Are you going to be up much longer? That sounded like an invitation to him, but he wasn't in the mood. Yeah, a little while. I have a couple of client reviews early tomorrow that I need to prepare for. Having become an expert in dodging, she knew a dodge when she heard it. Disappointed, she resisted the urge to blow up on him and softly replied, okay. Good night. She knew they had a lot of work in front of them. The agreement to seek counseling effectively kicked the can down the road. They immediately fell into their usual habits and only ate together on Saturday and Sunday night. One night they ordered Chinese, and on the other, Greg cooked with Jen, which made for a single pleasant evening out of 7 that week, which was more their norm than not. The following Monday morning, Liz walked into his office with 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She eased the door closed by pushing it with her butt. Greg smiled but raised his eyebrow at her closing the door. She asked, "How are you hanging in there?" "Honestly? I don't know. This is kind of a big week, isn't it?" She nodded her head in understanding, then asked, "I've never really said much about my first marriage, have I?" She was about to share something with him that only her late husband knew. He shook his head wondering what was coming. "I think I've told you that where we grew up in Russia was a struggle. There never was much. Good jobs were hard to find. Even harder unless you were connected, politically. Even then, I was growing up right after the collapse of the old Soviet regime. I would say those were hard times, but in my small town, my family and everyone else believed, truly believed, that that was just the way life in Russia was. Nobody in our town was optimistic. As I grew and more of the outside world seeped in, some countries, like Australia and America, seemed too fantastic to believe. What regimes don't realize is that the more propaganda that they feed to the people, the more the people believe the opposite of what they are fed. So if the government was telling us that the West, or the US in particular, wasn't that special, then it must really be something. I was determined to get out of my small town and out of Russia. I heard some of the older girls talking about being a mail-order bride. I was willing to do anything to get out of there. Now, in hindsight, I was incredibly lucky. I know sometimes girls end up captured by sex trafficking rings. I was so determined but so naive. Birth certificates where I was born were not as official as they are here and easily changed given the right incentive, so at just over 17, I signed up to be a mail-order bride and spent time working to get my birth certificate changed and my passport so I could come. It only took 6 months. My first American husband, who was 30 when we married, was not a kind man nor good man, but I didn't care. I'd seen much worse abuse in my own small town, so the slaps, bruises on the arm, and the occasional black eye didn't bother me. Not really. I was playing the long game. Compared to where I grew up, I believed that things would get better. And they did. Once in the US, while waiting for my working papers, I would visit with our neighbor Mrs. Heaton, a sweet older lady that watched after her grandchildren while her kids worked. When I was able to start working, I wanted to work at the local mall. I sold perfume, and it was glorious. Coming from my town which had very little, working in a mall selling wonderful fragrances was like going to Disney World every day. After I was here about 8 months, I became pregnant, which would help my chances of getting a green card and eventually citizenship. My husband was crazy about my being pregnant, because he didn't have a great desire to have children. I assured him that with my working, I could handle any extra costs. What my husband didn't know was that every time he left a mark on me, I would visit with Mrs. Heaton. She had a digital camera. This was before cell phones. She would take a picture of the bruise. I may have agitated him just a bit more than normal leading up to my due date. When I gave birth to Jonathan, I still had bruises on my arm and cheek. They called the police. Mrs. Heaton innocently supplied dozens of examples of evidence. This was his second violent arrest. His first was a bar brawl when he was a much younger man. He was arrested and put away for 2 years. Couldn't have a violent wife beater near a baby and new mother. We divorced right away. He tried to have me sent back to Russia, but that went nowhere. He had no real interest in being a father, and I've not spoken to him since. I moved in with Mrs. Heaton, who helped me by watching Jonathan while I worked. She was a wonderful woman. A couple of years later, while working at the mall, I met my second husband, David. He was everything I had hoped for but didn't get with my first husband. David was kind and sweet. He was an accountant, and he loved Jonathan. David helped me get into some night classes at the local community college, and I began working on my education. He helped me get my green card and eventually citizenship. He was wonderful. You remind me of him. She paused and smiled at the remembrance. Anyway, I've told you about the accident that killed him. He had good life insurance which allowed me to pay off the house and work my way through college. Mrs. Heaton passed not long after he did. Then I worked a couple of different jobs until you and Ron hired me. The reason I'm telling you all this is because when things looked bad, really bad, like when I was being beaten or right after David had died, I still believed that things would get better. Now, with what is happening with you and Jen, I imagine that the immediate future looks difficult for you, at least emotionally. But I want you to know, to believe, that things will get better because they will. He thought it was an impassioned declaration of her beliefs, a bit inspiring, actually. He reached across the desk to squeeze her hand and replied, "I'll try." On Tuesday evening, Greg once again saved Jen some dinner and sat a list of counselors on top of a folder by her plate. She arrived at 8 p.m., just after her usual time, and prepared to eat. The offered apology for being late sounded just like all the others from the last several years. As she was eating, Greg sat across from her and said, "I started the list and then gave it to Liz to help research them. Since you came into the office after, she's aware that we're looking for counseling and offered to help however she could." Of course, that meant that she is now an expert on our local counselors, having researched a couple of dozen, phone interviewed 10, provided me with a list of 6 to call, and then she and I narrowed it down to this list of 3. The folder contains all of her research. Jen smiled, "If I didn't think you'd kill me, I'd try to hire her away from you. It's hard to imagine a harder working or more efficient admin or analyst, or whatever her current title is. I told her when I was in there that your office would be lost without her. I'm sure she'll repeat that when it's time for her annual review." That brought out a chuckle. Good. She probably deserves a raise. Greg nodded. She probably does. What she really needs is an assistant of her own. Jen asked, is she still dating those stud muffins like we saw her with several years ago? Honestly, I don't know. I know she isn't dating much, which she finds funny because when Jonathan was younger, she dated just for fun, but now that he's in college she's eased back a bit. She's still young. She's still beautiful. She doesn't look a day over 35. She reminds me of Rose Leslie from The Good Fight in Game of Thrones. She doesn't knock your socks off the first time you meet her, but over time, she's a stunner. I'll bet she's going to age beautifully. I'm sure she has no shortage of interested men. She told me that after the problems with husband number 1 and then burying husband number 2, she's in no hurry to land husband number 3. But she doesn't mind the occasional date. He chuckled, probably to take the edge off. Good for her. She deserves someone good. Especially considering what she's been through. She was an actual mail-order bride, for God's sake. One time, when she and Jonathan joined us at our vacation house and it was just the two of us sitting outside, she shared a little bit with me about her first husband. She didn't provide many details, but it didn't sound good. He nodded his head. Not wanting to reveal the details Liz had shared with him, he replied, she gave me the same. Well, Russia's loss is our gain. She does deserve something good, though. I'll look at this list starting tonight, and we'll pick one out sometime between now and this weekend. Okay? Okay. That night they made love for the first time in what was now 7 weeks. It was slow and sweet, and when they finished, she snuggled back into him hoping that things were going to begin getting better. The next morning, Wednesday, she left the house early, as she normally did, to work out at the gym that was within walking distance from her office. The entire time during her workout, she was conflicted with her schedule for that day. She was remembering the very good night she had last night but also thinking about the good lunch that she could have in a few hours. It weighed heavily on her mind, especially after she received a text on her second cell phone that she left in her office and only used every other Wednesday, displaying the room number 2408. Nevertheless, at the appropriate time, she told her admin that she had an appointment and lunch and would be back around 2 o'clock. Entering the hotel several blocks down and over from her office, she had almost convinced herself that she could do this a few more times. Maybe continue until the counseling started. After all, she hadn't been caught yet. And if she were caught, now she had a get-out-of-jail-free card. As she strolled into the elevator and pushed the button for her floor, she could hear a rapid click 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 approaching, followed by a very rapid and very southern wait, what? Jen smiled and pushed the door open button to hold it for the upcoming woman. She watched as a short, curvy woman, about her age, also wearing a business suit and heels, with a skirt that was form-fitting down to below her knees, carrying a large messenger bag dash into the elevator. Chuckling, Jen asked, "What floor?" Turning towards Jen and looking at the mass of buttons, she replied, 24. Oh, you're going there, too. Thank you, honey. You know, there are some days that I wish men had to wear tight skirts and high heels just to see how quickly they could move. That brought a smile to Jen's face. She replied, I think some already do. That set both of them to cackling. Oh, don't get me started on that. There aren't enough good men already. Jen complimented her, I like your accent. Thanks again. Some people say I sound like Dolly. I wouldn't mind her money, but I'll pass on those back-breaking boobs, though I wouldn't mind having them for an hour or two for a steamy date and then give them back. Jen responded, amen to that. That set them both to laughing again. The shorter woman said, I love your suit. Is that an Armani? Jen replied close. It is Italian. It's a Cavalli. I didn't even know they sold those around here. I didn't either. My husband picked it out for me for my birthday last year. The small woman exclaimed, Your husband went shopping for you and had the taste to pick out that? Jen smiled, MMHMM. For 9 of the last 10 years, he and my daughter have made a day of it. He takes her to lunch, and they shop for my birthday. I know she helps, But I think he or his admin has the department manager at Neiman Marcus pick out some of the prettiest ones for them to look at. I'd be surprised if he's going through the racks all day. Still, I'm impressed. 9 out of 10 years? Damn. Wanting to brag on her husband, she declared, "This past year he sent me and my daughter to the spa while he cooked dinner for me. Holy shit. Can I borrow him for a weekend? I promise to send him back when I'm through with him." Oh no. Looking at you, I'd be afraid he might not want to come back. That elicited a smile from the newcomer. He shops and cooks? Let me guess. He also washes dishes, looks like Brad Pitt, dances like Fred Astaire, and whispers sweet nothings to you in French while loving you like Don Juan. That got another laugh from the two women. Jen responded, "Well, there is only one Brad Pitt. Instead of French, we were supposed to take Italian together before we eventually go to Italy. I don't know if he's Don Juan, but he knows how to curl my toes. But if you ever get him on the dance floor, you better have on steel-toed shoes. At least until we take lessons for that, too." Sounds like a keeper. Jen's face softened upon hearing that, especially given where she was standing. Oh, he's not perfect, but he is a good guy that makes mistakes. We're working through some of those, his and mine, very soon. Oh, well. Sorry to hear about those, but I'm glad you're working through them. I'm still looking for Mr. Right number 2. Be glad that you're still on number 1. Recognizing that she was barely hanging on to number 1, in a voice barely above a whisper, Jen said, "Thanks. I'm Charla, by the way. Charla Harris." She held out her hand to shake. Jen looked at her hand, smiled, and replied, "Jen West. Pleased to meet you. Forgive me, but my partners would kill me if I didn't give you one of my cards. If you're ever in need of delivery services, we're your team." That lowered the fun in the elevator a couple of levels, but she took the card anyway. Fiduciary Couriers. Women owned and operated. Jen perked back up. "Hey, I know your company. We use you for delivering legal documents and process serving. I'm in tax law, so I don't use your company that often, but I'll remember you going forward." Still women only? The elevator dinged for their floor, and they prepared to step into the hall. So far. We had a lot of help getting off the ground, including a couple of good men, but being women only helps us land a few clients we might not otherwise get. Also, while we do process serving, we don't really want to take those. Those can be soul-crushing at times. Most of our revenue is in small precious package delivery and medical delivery services. Good for you. Wait. Did you say your last name was West? I did. Do you happen to know Gregory West? Charla knew exactly who Gregory West was, and Jennifer West. Her confirming that a moment earlier was no accident. He's my husband. Charla smiled sweetly and replied, "His partner Ron helped us raise the funds to get our business off the ground. Now that we're doing well, Greg manages all of our retirement portfolios. I've actually eaten lunch with him." Oh, that sounds bad. With my other partners, at the same time. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm flustered and embarrassed because of what I said earlier. Anyway. We speak on the phone 3 or 4 times a year to review my retirement accounts. I trust him. I sleep better at night not worrying about my retirement. Wow. Small world, said Jen. It really is. However, Charla knew she was standing next to Greg's wife. Not knowing what floor Jen was supposed to be on, Charla had been waiting for her to arrive to get on the elevator with her, hoping she wouldn't come today. Jen thought about her husband for a second and decided that she wasn't going to go through with her lunch that day. She would just tell Trent, who she didn't love but had kind of enjoyed, that it was over and go back to work. If he wanted to discuss why, she would call him from her burner phone, then throw it away. She was feeling a little better regarding her situation. She and Greg did have a ton of work in front of them, but she truly believed that they could find a way to make their marriage better. As they approached the door where Jen was going, she was only now becoming aware that Charla was still walking with her. She paused 2 steps from the door and looked at Charla, What room are you delivering to? End of the hall. Oh. Well, it was nice meeting you, Charla. Jen? Yes? I can guess why you're here. Don't go in there. What? You don't want to go in there? Nothing but heartache lies on the other side of that door. Surprised, Jen asked, "Excuse me? I only need to deliver a message. Then I'm leaving. Not that it's any of your business. Have a nice day, Charla." Jen turned back towards the door and knocked loudly 3 times. Charla let out a resigning sigh, followed by a commanding, "Jennifer Nicole West." Jen was irritated now, but how did Charla know her middle? Stuffing the large envelope into Jen's hand, she asserted, "You've been served." Jen's knees buckled, and she stumbled backwards into the door, which opened into and against a stunned Trent, banging hard off the corner of his forehead. He caught her just before she hit the floor. In less than a second, Trent watched her turn a pale color and tears began to form. "Oh my God. What the fuck? What just happened?" Trent asked. "I was just served." "For what?" Jen responded, "It's Greg." "I know it's Greg." Seeing the envelope, he said, "Wait a second. Let's see what this contains, first." They sat on the bed and opened the envelope. Inside were 4 separate, smaller envelopes numbered number 1, number 2, number 3 and number 4, respectively. On the bottom corner of envelope number 2 was 1 pozob. Jen could only shake her head, having a good idea of what she was about to see. In reality, she was about to be surprised. They opened number 1 and saw several 8 by 10 pictures clipped together with numbered tabs on the side for viewing in order. The first picture was of Greg with the bimbo. The next picture was exactly the same except Jen's face was on the bimbo's body and Trent's was on Greg's body. The third picture was of the bimbo again and some other guy she didn't recognize. The remaining pictures were of her and Trent entering and exiting various rooms in that hotel and had been dated and timestamped going back several months. Envelope number 2 contained a letter. "Jen, if you are reading this, then you decided that you don't want to be married to me any longer. I really was willing to go to counseling with you, even after you've been fucking shithead, Trent, for at least a couple of months. I loved you that much. If you haven't deduced the answer yet, allow me to help. That video wasn't real. It was a deep fake. At the first link provided below, you will find another video exactly like the one you saw 2 weeks ago, except your face is on the bimbo, and shithead's face is on the porn star. The original video is at the second link below. It took me 2 weeks to find a suit that matched the porn stars. The CEO's daughter is actually a very nice and proper young lady. All you had to do was be truly remorseful, and we would have worked on fixing our marriage together. At least we would have tried. Remember me saying that I'd like to be somewhere near the top of your list? I shouldn't have ever been behind shithead. Have your attorney contact mine, and we'll split everything as fairly as we can. A proposed settlement is included along with the petition. Greg 1 pozob." She was already in tears when she opened the third envelope to see the divorce petition. Upon opening the fourth envelope, she and Trent were both stunned to see date and time-stamped pictures of Trent entering other hotel rooms with another woman. She would later realize that she shouldn't have been surprised. Shithead asked, "Do you think he's going to keep these quiet?" Jen laughed out loud. "Do you mean is he going to share them with your wife or the firm's managing partner, who also happens to be your father? I have no idea. But thank you for thinking about yourself while my world is burning down. I must be the most idiotic woman on the planet. I traded a boring but wonderful marriage and a solid man for exciting but mediocre sex with someone that can barely spell orgasm after half a dozen tries. Jesus, I'm so stupid. Well, fuck you. I didn't hear you complaining while you were bouncing up and down on my. It was fun, you idiot. It didn't mean anything. I kept hoping it would get better, but it didn't. Yeah. Right. Keep telling yourself that. Maybe you'll eventually believe it. Since nothing is happening today. I'm out of here." He began walking towards the door to the hallway. Over his shoulder, he called to her, "Tell your husband that he needs to keep those away from my wife, or he'll be hearing from me." She shouted back at him, "You best pray that you don't hear from him on some dark night." Trent waved his hand dismissively at her as if what she said wasn't of interest to him. As soon as he opened the door to leave, Jen heard Charla call out, "Trent Allen Thornton. You've been served." Jen smirked. "You go, Charla, and Greg. I hope Trent's wife takes everything from him." Normally, Jen was an intelligent woman. As she sat on the edge of the bed with all the pictures and documents spread out, she was trying to find some path, some way that she might be able to convince Greg to give her another chance. She struggled to think of any logical way that he would. The best she could come up with was begging, hoping, and praying. She checked on her phone and, unsurprisingly, she didn't see Greg's location anywhere. Once again, he had removed her ability to locate him. She gathered everything, stuffed it back into the envelopes, and began walking towards the elevator, defeated and a little bit, suddenly, very scared, not knowing what the future was going to bring. Liz knew she was coming. Just like 2 weeks ago, she could actually see her on the Tile app on her tablet. Realizing that Jen was leaving her cell phone in her office during her liaisons and having those calls forwarded to her burner phone, Greg had slipped a Tile tracker into her purse. It all started just over a couple of months ago. Liz's brother, who now lived in Hamburg, Germany, had come to visit for a few days. On his last day there, she had finished eating a late breakfast with him and his wife in the hotel restaurant, and when they stood to leave, she saw Jen come strolling through the lobby and get into the elevator. Jen walked over and watched as the elevator passed the second floor, which contained the conference rooms, and stopped at a high floor. After seeing her brother off, she was conflicted about if she should say anything to Greg. She knew that Jen had been working very long hours for a trial she was involved in, and that Greg and her marriage had been struggling for some time. She wondered if this was one of the reasons why it was struggling, or did Jen have a legitimate reason for being there? Using her brother's phone, she tried to call Jen's office. Her assistant said she was in a meeting until 2 p.m. No, Liz didn't want to leave a message. When she arrived back at the office, she asked Greg if he could locate her on his Find My Friends app, which showed that she, or at least her cell phone, was in her office. When he called her assistant, he got the same response, but they both knew she was at the hotel. Thus, began the investigation, which led to the discovery of her every other Wednesday affair. Then Greg spent a couple of weeks thinking about what he was going to do. The deepfake video and hope for counseling were what transpired. Now, with her having been served, Liz and Greg expected she would look for him at his office. She did. As angry as she was at Jen for wounding Greg so deeply, Liz felt a tinge of sadness seeing the crushed woman enter her area. Only this time, instead of on fire, she was very demure. Once again, Liz shook her head. "He isn't here, Jen. Feel free to check his office, but he hasn't been in all day." Jen barely nodded her head. "You know where he is though, don't you?" "At this moment? No. But I do know where he's going to be. Knowing how you feel about cheaters, I'm sure you cannot stand the sight of me right now, but could you deliver a message to him?" This is my job, Jen. That could get me fired. I need this job." "I know. I know you do. He won't fire you. He needs you more than he needs me. I'll pay you $10,000 if you'll deliver a message for me." "Seriously?" "I will. I'll write you a check right now. You know that even if I hand him a message, he may not read it." "I know, but..." She was fighting to hold back the tears. She had been so foolish, but I have to try, Liz. Don't you see? I have to. The first tear escaped. She really was struggling to hold on. Liz wasn't about to comfort her, but she did say, "If you are serious, write me a check right now, and have the text or email here before 4 p.m. I'll print it and drop it off where he's staying for the next couple of days. But make it count because I can't do it again. Understand?" Jen nodded her head more definitively this time. "Okay. Thank you, Liz. I appreciate it." Jen wrote out a check for $10,000. Afterwards, Liz watched a hurting and embarrassed woman shuffle away from her office that afternoon. While waiting for the email or letter to arrive, Liz took a late lunch and deposited the check. Jonathan could use a new computer or tablet for college, and she planned to pay for it as soon as he picked it out. At 3:30 p.m., Liz returned holding an envelope with Greg's name handwritten across the front. After Jen left and once Liz could see that she was more than a few blocks away, she decided to call it a day. She made a fast stop at Home Depot on the way home for an innocent display of affection she had in mind and then pointed her vehicle towards her house. She was playing the long game. When she opened her garage door, Greg's SUV was already there, as she knew it would be. Her best friend planned to lean on her for a few days just as she had leaned on him and Ron in the early days of her coming to work for them. Even before she went inside, she could smell food cooking. Upon opening the door, she was overwhelmed by garlic and onions. Her mouth was watering already. She hid her purchase inside her satchel and placed it by a chair at the kitchen table. Greg turned to see her enter and smiled. "How did it go?" She walked up to him and squeezed him tightly and kissed him on the cheek. "Fine. I'll tell you about it over dinner." "I'm assuming you are cooking dinner for us." "I am. Let me pour you a glass of wine." She chuckled. "You do realize that when a woman comes home to a man cooking her dinner, she's very likely not going to let him leave. I'm going to chain you to the handle on the stove, or maybe the refrigerator door." He smiled. "I don't mind cooking. It's been therapeutic for the last year or so. It lets me focus on something besides my problems." Speaking of problems, Jen paid me $10,000 to deliver this to you. She placed the envelope on the kitchen island. He picked it up and looked at it briefly, then tossed it into a corner on the floor. "I'll pick it up and put it in my bag later. I don't want it to distract us while we eat." She helped him finish up, and when they sat to eat, she could see the letter still lying on the floor. She paused for a second. "Now that you've actually had her served, can I ask you a question?" "Shoot. Why the fake video? Why did you want her to think that you cheated?" He gave Liz a sad smirk and let out a long breath. "Well, 2 reasons, actually. First, I was giving her every opportunity for us to tackle our problems together, as equals. Prior to her cheating, I think we were both failing our marriage. Sure, I can blame her hours, but honestly, once the kids moved out, we both struggled. I wanted her to see that we both made mistakes and would approach counseling on equal footing. I love her and didn't want her to go into it thinking this is all on her." Liz offered, "That was rather magnanimous." He shrugged and continued, "Second, and most importantly, I wanted her to know how it felt to be cheated on. The anger bordering on rage. The frustration. The hurt and self-doubt. If we had gone to counseling, I would have told her that I faked the movie, but without experiencing the betrayal, she never would have understood where I was coming from during those counseling sessions. She would have seen it as simply a mistake and not the extinction-level event that it felt like." She inquired, "Why did you have them served separately?" Divide and conquer. Her being served first would make him wonder how he was going to be impacted. I'd be surprised if he was worried about anyone but himself in this mess. His wife told me that they were about to start trying to have kids. She dodged a bullet there, she was not a happy camper. So what now? Are you still planning to buy one of those condos near the office? Probably. Or something else near there. Eventually. We have to finalize the division of assets, and that could take a while depending on if she fights the divorce or not. I have enough liquid assets for a large deposit right now, but if I wait a little longer for our real estate to sell, then I could pay cash for it." "You're going to sell your vacation house? That's such a shame. I enjoyed taking Jonathan there those times that we joined you and your family." "Yeah. It's a nice place." Liz had been hesitant to ask this, but the comment regarding the vacation house gave her the perfect opportunity. "Why don't you try and keep it, and instead of buying something new you could just live here, for now, or at least take some time before listing it? You're just trying to get me to cook more for you." She chuckled and grinned at him, "Absolutely. This is the best thing I've eaten in a while." "Thanks. We'll see. They enjoyed sharing their dinner together. They cleaned up, together, and watched a movie on TV. Halfway through the movie, Liz moved over and sat next to him and snuggled into him. She said, "I'm not starting anything. I just want you to know that you are loved and appreciated." He gave her a gentle squeeze but did not push her away. He didn't finish the movie. Emotionally exhausted, he passed out on the couch. The next morning, Jen woke in her own bed, alone, remembering why she was by herself. She was equating her current situation as having neglected car maintenance for a long time, and then she did something stupid to actually break the car. She had no idea if the car could be fixed, and it would take Greg wanting it to be fixed, also. The trial that she and Trent spent so much time preparing for had kept them together for months. Late hours. A lot of meals. They had developed a real camaraderie. He flirted outrageously, and she just laughed at his efforts but never really discouraged him. Following years of marriage neglect, she was enjoying the attention. After celebrating their trial win over dinner and wine, they ended up in a hotel room with him ravaging her. Of all their times together, it was probably the only time he had given her an orgasm. She guessed it was from the excitement and illicitness of the encounter. It was all downhill from there, as the few remaining ones she had came more from her efforts than his. Sitting up in bed, she checked her phone and seeing no messages from anyone, decided to get ready to go to the gym and then work since that was all she had at the moment. With Trent having been served divorce papers, that was likely to create a ruckus in the office, but maybe, just maybe Trent's wife wasn't mentioning her in the divorce, and she would stay relatively unscathed at work. Hopefully. Even if she did escape an immediate mess at the office, unless Trent, son of the managing partner, was let go, which was unlikely, her long-term prospects there would have to be managed carefully, with Trent likely to take over one day. She thought that she might need to very discreetly float her resume to avoid having to deal with that. She could try to raise a sexual harassment suit, but if she lost the suit, her career would be over. Now she knew why Greg had used the CEO's daughter in describing his fake affair. The example was similar to her own situation. Sad. She knew it was all perfectly avoidable, though she guessed these things usually are. Maybe she could at least save her marriage. Maybe. At Liz's, Greg woke on the couch laid out lengthwise with a blanket covering him to his waist, several hours after he fell asleep. He didn't see Liz, so he guessed she was already in bed. His watch told him it was nearly 2:30 a.m. As he stood to walk to the ground floor guest bedroom, he felt something on his ankle. He looked down and saw a fuzzy, pink Velcro handcuff attached to his ankle. Attached to the handcuff was a flimsy, thin chain that extended towards the kitchen. Walking into the kitchen, he saw it tied off, not locked, to the door handle on the oven. He smiled at the thought and went to bed in the guest bedroom. The next morning, early, Liz awoke to the smell of something being cooked in the kitchen. That brought a smile to her face, and she quickly threw on her knee-length robe, brushed her hair, and swished some mouthwash before descending the stairs to the kitchen. Upon entering, she saw Greg preparing French toast. He had reattached the pink handcuff and chain for her benefit. He didn't even jump when she walked up behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and crushed her boobs into his back. He enjoyed that feeling. "Trying to make me fat?" she asked. "Trying to earn my rent? You don't have to worry about that." "Neither do you," he replied. "I like your pink handcuffs. Makes me imagine all sorts of possibilities." She let out a long laugh. "You just keep imagining. It'll help you heal." He chuckled also. Once sitting and eating, he asked, "You going into the office this morning?" "I am. My boss is off today, so I may be a few minutes late." They both smiled at that. She followed with, "However, I am taking off tomorrow." He raised his eyebrow over that revelation and said, "I'm laying low until Monday, so any work I do will be from here." "I know. I'm picking up something for us to cook tonight, and tomorrow we are going to get out and do something. I don't care if we walk around the park, go hiking, visit a museum, or just lay out at the community pool." Greg had seen her in a swimsuit before, so he knew that could be a treat. "I appreciate your looking after me. I'll try not to be too whiny while I stay here." You and Ron have taken good care of me and Jonathan over the years. I've been through one divorce and lost my second husband. So, I know all about loss. Ha! As I told you, growing up in Russia, loss or at least difficult times are expected. But it is no fun going through it. I may not be your best friend, but you are my best friend. I hate why you are in this situation, but I love having you here and hope that you won't be in any hurry to leave. Stay at least until the divorce is final. There's no rush. You know that could be 3 to 6 months. She shrugged her shoulders and nonchalantly replied, okay. So? Seriously. I don't want to wear out my welcome. Seriously. You aren't going to. They stared at each other for a few moments. He was trying to think of what to say next. She started, let's try to keep your mind occupied. You enjoyed your cooking class, and I'm enjoying the fruits of that. Why don't we take one together? He pondered that thought a moment and remembered how much more fun it was when he wasn't doing it alone and replied, sounds good to me. What did you have in mind? She didn't think he was getting where she was going, but she was okay with that. They would get there together, eventually, hopefully. You've already taken a Mediterranean cooking class. Let's take a baking one together, or maybe one that focuses on Thai or Indian food. Or, I know, you used to talk about going on a tour of Italy. While you've been working with the language app to learn Italian, so have I. We could take an Italian class together. Or something like that. She could see him thinking and considering a moment. We could go to Buenos Aires and take tango lessons. 2 rooms, of course. She nearly spewed out her coffee upon hearing that, but in for a penny, in for a pound. She rebutted, hell. If we're going to do that, let's go all the way and take Spanish lessons in Argentina while we are also taking our tango lessons. 2 rooms, of course. She had a lascivious smile when she said the last part. Why don't we have those as goals and see how the local activities go first? Deal. She looked at him, smiled, and added, breakfast was wonderful, and I'm not just referring to the food. Thank you. I need to go get ready. Okay. I'll clean up. When she began walking toward the stairs, he was admiring her form and her walk. He appreciated her personal tail. He called after her, Liz? She turned to look at him, thank you. I'm feeling better already. Just you wait, Greg West. I'm not so arrogant as to think that I can stop the pain or heal your heart, but if you let me, I can help. As he watched her climb the stairs, he thought, I'll bet she can. Greg got around to reading Jen's letter that day. He honestly felt compassion for her, because he had difficulty turning off the love for someone he had loved for so long. But he wasn't going back. He was tired of fighting for a spot near the top of her list. He honestly had no thoughts about starting something with Liz. She was a dynamite admin and a great friend helping him through a tough time. Jen tried to convince Greg to go to counseling, but he persuaded her that they had been too far apart for too long and that too much damage had been done. The kids were disappointed but not surprised. They had spoken several times and wondered if a divorce was forthcoming. It did. Jen was not named in Trent's divorce case, only the other woman from the hotel. Trent's father was more than a little disappointed in his son. The episode convinced him that Trent was nowhere near ready to take over the firm. So, he decided to work a little longer and position someone else to lead the firm when he retired. If Trent were to take over, it wouldn't be for at least 10 more years. Jen was approached to sign an agreement saying that she would not sue them for sexual harassment, and in return, she was given a 10-year agreement preventing her from being fired for any reason other than gross negligence. It was a huge relief. That worked out well for everyone, including Greg, because it meant he didn't have to pay any alimony, which he had worried about if she were for some reason let go. Amongst the financial settlement, Greg did keep the vacation house. He tried to use it more frequently. Liz always accompanied him. Liz's long-term thinking skills that helped her at work also helped her in her personal life. Just because she never made a romantic move towards Greg, she wasn't idle, though she did try to be subtle. When just the two of them were at the vacation house, she wore a smallish two-piece swimsuit instead of her usual conservative bikinis. Around her house, she dressed the same, though maybe she wore a few more skirts so that when she would sit next to him on the couch, always, the skirt would ride up a little, showing more of her shapely legs. From time to time, she would join him for breakfast wearing a thin silk robe over a silk, knee-length, strappy nightgown with a lot of lace. She would give him a dazzling smile whenever she saw how he had to squirm a little to adjust himself when seeing her in that. She greeted him every morning with longish hugs, letting him know how much she appreciated him and that he was loved. She ended each day the same way. It took them just over 1 year to share their first passion-filled kiss. It took them less than 1 minute after that kiss to make it to her bedroom, which is where they slept for the next 10 years until they retired. 4 months after the kiss, they were married. Italy greeted them warmly, as did Argentina. Jen was genuinely happy for the new couple, sad for herself, but happy for them. She knew they were good for each other. Their kids were disappointed, but glad to see their father happy again. Even though it took some trial and error and heartache to get there, Liz and Greg proved to be good partners in business and in life. Liz had encouraged in him a positive attitude that things would get better, and then she took it upon herself to ensure that they did. That's it. I hope it was entertaining. Kind of scary what can be done with deep fakes these days. There is a story on Lit specifically about that. In this story, the deep fake was intended for her to feel his pain, nothing more. I have a great deal of respect for couples that can drift apart and find their way back. I suspect that is incredibly difficult. Thanks for your time.